Barbara Brewer here for CapeMayRadio.org and the Center for Community Arts. Today we're spotlighting John Sweeder, an author and poet, and we're going to talk about his two books today. Untethered Balloons is a book of poems, and we have a self-help memoir called Faith Jeans for the Blue Jean Generation. Hi, John.
Hello.
John has been a finalist for several poetry awards, published in many literary journals, and he's also appeared in the Cape May County Herald and the Ocean City Sentinel. He's a retired educator, an English language and communications teacher, and a teacher of teachers, right? At LaSalle University and Temple, or that was your...
I was a professor at LaSalle. I graduated as an undergraduate from LaSalle College back in that time and got my master's and doctorate at Temple University.
And you have several academic things published too. And the one title that I saw said, Drowning in a Clear Pool, Cultural Narcissism, Technology, and Character Education from 2002. That sounded interesting.
Oh, yeah, it was. I actually co-authored it with two colleagues, Dr. Fran Ryan and Dr. Marianne Bednar. They were colleagues of mine. I enjoyed working with them for, about 2 decades. And we published that book in and around 2000.
It sounds like it's pertinent still today, but you have lived in Yardley, PA, Philadelphia, and are now a resident of Ocean City.
Yeah, I've lived here now for about 10 years,
and
since I retired.
And writing and participating with several writers groups around the county, and plus, quote, honing his skills as a back bay saltwater angler.
Yeah, I do a lot of crabbing and a lot of flounder fishing, and occasionally a striped bass.
Let's talk about your memoir first. It is called Faith Jeans for the Blue Jean Generation. That's an interesting title. What can you say about that?
Actually, it has its roots in that scholarly work you mentioned earlier, Drowning in a Clear Pool. While I was working on that book, I learned a lot about the history of character education and something called a moral compass from my colleague, Fran Ryan, who is a historian. When I learned about how the history of character education evolved over the last couple centuries, I learned about people's moral compasses, which is kind of an old-fashioned term today, but I brought it back. It really has to do with a belief, a personal belief, that everybody, almost everyone who comes into this world is born with a moral compass, a sense of right or wrong. It can be cultivated or it can be thwarted in life according to our environment, our parents, our families, our culture. I originally wrote a memoir, which you did not mention, which I self-published when I first retired. I took a few courses in Seattle City with Eva Feely on memoir writing. And I proceeded over the next few years after I retired to write a memoir dealing with the first 18 years of my life called Breathing Through a Straw. And I published that, self-published that online. And I was teaching myself along the way, what's involved in writing a memoir? What makes it different than, for example, an autobiography or a biography? And I picked up through reading other authors and memoirists some tips. So I took that experience of writing the first memoir and I tried to search. It was pretty much written in chronological order when I wrote that. But in Faith Jeans for the Blue Jean Generation, I decided to focus more on a theme. So it's a very brief work that's available on Amazon. It's only 45 pages long. But it comes back to the belief that everybody has what I call a faith gene, a moral compass. And throughout our lives, on occasion, just through the normal course of events, we're faced with ethical and moral dilemmas, and our moral compasses, our faith genes, help guide us through those to resolve them in a positive way or perhaps in a negative way.
I like the phrase you used, unanticipated ethical dilemmas.
Yeah, thank you.
I like the unanticipated part because it jumps at you sometimes when you have to make a decision.
Without question. So what I did in this little book is I reflected, having written a number of memoir snapshots, and I thought to myself, which ones dealt with these unanticipated events? And I collected them briefly in here. and I decided to share them. Interestingly enough, when I finished the book, I said to myself, what was the point of this book? And in the preface, I wrote the preface last, and I informed my readers that this is pretty much a kind of self-help book. It clarified events in my life for me. And I must say, not always painting me in the most positive light, but I think in a realistic light. And I
Right.
think most people that I've run into in my life have had similar kinds of ethical dilemmas, especially for the blue jean generation. A lot of people my age, I'm 73 now, I think we're at the stage of our lives where we reflect on our youth, our adolescence, our young adulthood, and the productive years when we're actively working. But I find that especially in the last decade or so, I'm going back reflecting more and more about things that occurred to me earlier in my life and how I dealt with them. And I constantly ask myself the question, in a way, did I live a good life? Was I a good person? What can I do about it now?
I was interested in the fact that your faith, you're from a Catholic tradition.
Oh, yeah.
No matter whether how you come and you go, or you wander and you come back and whatever,
Yeah.
what have you, you still have that habit of self-examination and self-reflection that you're not afraid to do. And a lot of people, some people don't have that advantage, even if they're not particularly religious.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
You can admit you're wrong, but you also have to forgive yourself sometimes.
I'm sure there's many a secular humanist who do this all the time.
Would you mind reading a little bit from your memoir there? I was thinking that you were talking about the introduction there, and maybe the epilogue as well.
All right. So,
okay, and this is from John Sweeder's Faith Genes for the Blue Jean Generation, a self-help memoir.
This is the brief prologue. When I began writing this memoir, I had little notion it would evolve into a self-help book. But that is, in fact, what it has become, a book intended to help me, myself. However, this book is not just about me. Rather, it's a self-help book for everyone, especially for those of you who, like me, revisit your past from time to time to reflect upon those memorable people and events, both positive and negative, that have helped nurture or thwart your own faith gene, and thus gain insight into becoming a more ethical and less selfish human being. During the 1950s, when I was a young child, I often looked up at Earth's moon on hot summer evenings and wondered what it would be like to live on it. When my parents told me that the moon was made of green cheese, I imagined myself with a narrow shovel in hand, removing small chunks of the moon to sample to see if I liked its taste. Once, an elderly neighborhood couple asked me if I could see the man in the moon. I stared at the moon's surface for a few minutes and then replied, yeah, I can see him. Of course, I talked myself into believing that that was possible, just like I believed that hand puppet Lamb Chop could banter with her human sidekick, ventriloquist Sherry Lewis.
I remember her.
Almost all young children gaze at the moon at night in wonder and question, how did it get there? Or why is the moon yellow sometimes and strawberry red at others? As kids, we tend to accept as true what the caring adults in our lives teach us. But as we grow older, we begin to question and challenge their statements and advice, sometimes fervently. Yet, often, the so-called truths we learn as we grow up remain with us throughout our lives, even in the face of contradictory evidence, everyday experience, and plain common sense. It's as if we were born with immutable faith genes that, as much as we try to repress, alter, or extract them, we cannot. In the following episodic snapshots taken from my life as a blue jean wearing baby boomer, I explain what faith genes are, how they come to be, and how, if we pay close attention to them, they can help us become better, more ethical human beings and decision makers.
Thank you. Well, how about the epilogue?
Sure. Well, as I stated in my prologue, this memoir developed into an unexpected self-help book for me. a blue jean wearing American baby boomer of the 1950s and 60s. As it evolved, I began reflecting more deeply upon the ways in which the intangible ingredients of my personal faith gene, ingredients such as guilt, love, empathy, forgiveness, responsibility, and sacrifice, have helped season my life's ever-developing soup recipe. I have learned the benefits of helping others develop a strong sense of belonging, that prayer and faith often go hand in hand, that unjust decisions made by those in authority need to be called out so they're never repeated, that it is wise not only to question, but respect the moral belief systems of others, that I need to follow the dictates of my conscience while remaining open to others' moral viewpoints, that jumping and tripping over life's obstacles is inevitable and often enlightening, that I should solve ethical and moral dilemmas on my own without relying too heavily upon others, that counting on the love of family anchors my life, especially during the hardest of times, that sometimes breaking a promise or betraying a confidence is necessary to benefit a greater good, that there's still time remaining in my life to make up for past oversights or transgressions, that I need to pay homage to those who shoulder life's major responsibilities, and that, like my brother Mike, I need to run faster. And that's an allusion to one of the stories called
Yeah.
Faster, in it, which I talk about really some of my shortcomings and how my younger brother, through his behavior, kind of highlighted them.
What highlighted them. Yeah, that was a poignant story because he was much younger than you and really grew up in a different family almost.
Sure.
Well, that's the prose section of your life.
Yeah.
Let's go over to your poetry, Untethered
Unethical
Balloons. Now, this I thought was kind of impressive because it's so wide ranging. You have 8 sections, and I tried to figure out what was the theme of each one. So I kind of thought the shore as a child, and Philly and school days, and springtime, and also Vietnam. Then the third section seems to be about writing. I like the one I bumped into a poem. That's a special request of mine if you want to.
Actually, I
That one?
plan to read that first.
Oh, good. And then 4, growing up along the shore. So as a grown up more along the shore. So you're looking at children or younger people, and sometimes you don't seem to be yourself. You're another character. So it's kind of fun that way because we get to meet different people. And then on the 5th one, it looks like a short spring section. Then you have a Christmas time at the shore, and then you go on to foreign lands. There's wartime. There's a refugee. There's you're
Yeah.
fleeing a country. Is kind of like the dark side of things. And then finally, the 8th section seems to be about faith. So, what do you think of that analysis?
Not bad. Not bad. I do reflect a lot on the past. Some ways you might view it as a nostalgia. When you talk about the section where I write about poetry, to poets, when you write a poem about poetry, it's referred to in the business, so to speak, as ars poetica. And I do write poems about poems. I write poems about my environment, looking out my back window, the things that I observe walking around my neighborhood here in Ocean City, walking along the beach, the back bays, fishing and crabbing, and that's part of it. When you talked about the dark side, I also am an avid reader of newspapers and keeping up with not only local but world events.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's a lot of unfortunate things occurring around the world, and sometimes I'm moved to write about them. Sometimes that's referred to as the modern condition, things that in 21st century we're faced with dealing with, not just on a micro level, but also on a macro level. The influence, for example, of technology on us, or the internet.
Yeah, I like those because we hardly ever get comments on technology, but we need them.
The first one, I'll do the one you suggested. I bumped into a poem. Last summer, I read poetry at the New York Poetry Festival. Festival on Governor's Island in New York City. And I
Nice.
began with this poem. And one of the reasons I begin with this poem, because it is light verse, it's easy to understand, and I hope it's entertaining. I suspect that's why you might have asked me to read this. I bumped into a poem. I bumped into a poem and knocked it to the ground. I thought I may have killed it. At first, it made no sound. I noticed it was breathing, tried to bring it to its feet, but I stumbled accidentally and kicked it back into the street. Then I stepped onto a stanza, thought I broke one of its lines, but it stretched like Turkish taffy and began to sing and rhyme. It crooned with such sweet rhythm, I danced and clapped in time and struck my shoe soles so hard that their worn leather shined. When the poem finished singing, I helped it to its feet, took it home to my apartment and fed it shredded wheat. It went to bed right after and didn't watch TV, but laid awake all night versing to be free. It yearned for inspiration and woke me up at dawn to beat me in a game of chess. It made its king my pawn. Smiling, the poem thanked me and said, "It's time to go." But before it did, it made its bed and then paused to let me know that the time we spent together helped fertilize its muse, like a drummer, bass, and pianist jam to improvise the blues. I walked it to my entrance door and said with words sincere, "I'll miss you. Please come again." Then I watched it disappear. I'd like to make a comment about how I shifted from memoir writing into poetry writing. Once again, in Seattle City, a woman by the name of Eva Feely, who has had great influence on a number of people in Cape May County with respect to memoir writing and poetry writing and other forms of writing as well. But I wanted to try to become a better prose writer, a better memoirist. And I thought one of the things that would help me was to focus on poetry, because it forces you, poetry forces you to think metaphorically, using similes. It forces you or encourages you to use imagetic language, not just on what we see, but what we hear, what we smell, what we taste. It forces you to pay attention to the sound of words and rhymes, internal rhymes. So that was one of my rationales for moving from memoir to poetry. And ironically enough, when I shared poems in open mics, both here in Cape May County as well as in Atlantic City, there's a South Jersey writers collective there, and I used to go to open mics there. Again, these little seminars are around Cape May County and even into Atlantic City. I've gotten a lot of positive response, and so I've been focusing actually for perhaps the last 7 years almost exclusively on poetry. I'll probably move back into memoir if I live long enough.
So, John, what would you like to wrap up with?
I'd like to wrap up with a poem, one of my favorite poems that I've written called On Wine and Poetry.
Okay.
My wife and I belong to a wine club, and
Nice.
over the years, we've had more than a bottle.
Okay.
So let me get this one started. It's called On Wine and Poetry. Please drink a poem as you would a glass of wine. Hold it up to the light and inspect it for clarity. Is it fizzy and bright, sparkling like a chilled Vino Verde, or more complex like a white Burgundy? Perhaps its essence is darker, like grapes grown in lush loam, or more subtle, like a Dickinson poem that tells truth slant. Feel the verse on your tongue and swish it around for sound. Sip it syllable by syllable and taste its tannin come around. If its nose is foul smelling, like wine that's been corked, cast it aside as you would a chapbook of doggerel. If it suits your taste, then drink it again with a meal and a friend.
Nice. Like drinking wine. That's good. Well, John, where can we find your books?
The easiest place to find them is on Amazon.
Mhm.
Another place you could find it is on my Facebook page. I pretty much dedicate my Facebook page to things dealing with my poetry and my prose writing. And I'm sure that there are some samples of my poems there, and there are links to all the books if you're so moved. If you Google John Sweeder, poet, that should get you to where you need to go to.
And that's Sweeder.
D as in David, ER.
Well, I thank you very much for talking with us today. It was great having you.
That was great being here. I appreciate the invitation.